Growing up, I never felt like the protagonist of my own story. It was as if I was a background character in the grand narrative my parents had crafted, a placeholder while my younger brother, Caleb, basked in the spotlight. I was Ethan Bennett, 23M, the older son, the one who worked hard but never got the recognition. And no matter how much effort I put in, I was invisible. It started early. When I was 10 years old, I won first place in the regional science fair. It was a huge deal. My project had been selected out of hundreds, and I'd spent months working on it. That afternoon, I raced home, clutching my trophy, eager to show my parents. But when I walked in, I found them in the living room, cheering for Caleb's soccer tryout. Not a tournament, not even a game, just a tryout. I stood there for what felt like an eternity before I finally spoke up. "Hey, I won first place in the science fair," I said, beaming, hoping for a sliver of the excitement they had for Caleb. My dad barely looked up. "That's nice, Ethan," he muttered, before turning back to my brother. "Caleb, you were amazing out there. Son, we're so proud of you." That night, I sat alone in my room, staring at my trophy. It should have felt like a victory. But instead, it felt like a cruel joke. As the years passed, I started testing my theory. At 14, I deliberately didn't tell them about my history project, just to see if they'd notice. They didn't. That same week, Caleb had to make a basic poster for school, and my mom stayed up until 2 a.m. helping him glue pictures onto it. When I turned 16, my dad promised to teach me how to drive. He talked about it for months, how it was a father-son tradition. But when the time came, "Sorry, buddy, Caleb has a big science project. We'll do it next week." Next week never came. My uncle had to teach me instead. My dad never even asked how it went. The final nail in the coffin was my high school graduation, a moment that was supposed to be one of the biggest milestones of my life. My classmates' parents showed up early, cheering, taking photos, holding flowers. Mine? They walked in late, after I had already received my diploma. I saw them sneaking in through the back, whispering to each other like they had just arrived at a casual lunch date. My father leaned over and said, "Sorry, Caleb's game ran late. A volleyball game. That was more important than my graduation." That night, I sat in my car alone, gripping my diploma, trying to process the truth I had been avoiding my entire life. I didn't matter to them. No matter what I did, I would always be second place. I tried once, just once, to tell them how I felt. I was 19. I had bottled everything up for too long. So I finally snapped. "Why do you always put Caleb first? Why do you never care about my achievements?" My mom sighed dramatically and said, "Ethan, you're being so selfish. Caleb just needs more support. You should be happy for your brother." My father nodded along like a bobblehead. That was the moment I gave up. I stopped trying. I stopped hoping, because I finally understood. I was never going to be enough for them. After years of being pushed aside, I had convinced myself that maybe, just maybe, my college graduation would be the moment things changed. That this time, I wouldn't be the afterthought. I had spent 4 years working my ass off, balancing part-time jobs, late-night study sessions, and brutal exams, all so I could walk across that stage and finally feel like my hard work mattered. I reminded my parents weeks in advance. "Graduation is on the 18th at 10 a.m. Make sure to get there early because parking will be a nightmare." My mom had barely glanced up from her phone. "Of course, honey, we wouldn't miss it." But deep down, a small, familiar voice whispered, "Don't get your hopes up." The night before, I sent a reminder text to the family group chat. No response. But that wasn't unusual. Graduation morning came, and I felt a nervous excitement building. This was my day. Megan, my girlfriend, had promised to meet me at my apartment at 8:30 a.m. so we could head there together. At 9 o'clock, she still hadn't shown up. I called her. The second she answered, I immediately knew something was wrong. There was loud chatter and laughter in the background. "Hey, where are you? We need to go," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She hesitated. "Oh, something came up." My stomach dropped. No, she wouldn't. "I'm at your parents' house, helping them move Caleb into his new apartment." Silence. I sank onto my bed, gripping my phone so hard my knuckles turned white. I was dressed in my cap and gown, ready to celebrate one of the biggest moments of my life. And my entire family, including my girlfriend, was at my brother's apartment instead. You're kidding, right? My voice was eerily calm. There was a pause. Then, she sighed, annoyed. Not guilty. Your mom asked me to help. I thought you knew. She thought I knew. Like it was obvious that I would be left behind. Like I had just accepted my place as the afterthought. So, none of you are coming? I asked, my voice hollow. They said they might try to make it toward the end? She sounded bored, like my graduation was some inconvenient errand they would squeeze in if they had time. That was it, the final proof. I didn't matter. Not to my parents. Not even to Megan. I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced myself to stay calm. Tell them not to bother, I said coldly. They wouldn't want to miss Caleb's housewarming party. Megan started to say something, but I hung up, and then I sat there, in my cap and gown, alone. 4 years of blood, sweat, and sacrifice, and I had no one. I was about to take off my gown, about to skip the whole thing, when my phone rang again. Uncle Ben, my dad's older brother. Hey, kiddo, he said, his voice warm. I'm outside your building, ready to go celebrate that diploma. For a moment, I just stared at the phone. Then I exhaled shakily, grabbed my keys, and walked out the door. That day, my uncle was the only one cheering for me. And as I walked across that stage, scanning the crowd for a family that never showed up, something inside me snapped. They didn't forget me. They chose not to be there. And I was done choosing them. After the graduation ceremony, I kept glancing at my phone, half expecting a last-minute apology, a desperate excuse, something, anything, to explain why my parents and Megan had decided to skip one of the biggest days of my life. Instead, all I got were more reminders of how little I mattered. A text from my mother. Sorry we couldn't make it. Sweetie, Caleb's apartment is just so nice, you'll love it when you see it. A message from my dad. Let's do dinner next weekend to celebrate you. Next weekend. Because, of course, my graduation wasn't important enough to interrupt my brother's moving day. I clenched my phone so hard my fingers ached. I had no dinner planned. No celebration waiting for me. My family was too busy throwing a party at Caleb's new place while I stood there, diploma in hand, feeling like a fool for ever thinking they'd change. I should have expected it. I should have known better. But somehow, this hurt worse than all the other times. It was Uncle Ben who saved the night. As we left the campus, he clapped a hand on my shoulder. You hungry? He asked. Like he already knew the answer. Yeah, I muttered, barely holding myself together. Good, he said with a grin. Because we're going somewhere fancy. I barely had the energy to argue as he drove us to one of the most expensive steakhouses in town. The kind of place where they don't even put prices on the menu. When we walked in, the staff actually clapped as they saw my cap and gown. For the first time all day, I actually felt celebrated. Uncle Ben didn't hold back. He ordered the best steak on the menu, the most expensive wine, and even had the waiter bring out a special dessert just for me. Then, just as I was starting to let go of the disappointment, my phone buzzed again. Megan, where are you? Are you coming to Caleb's party after? I stared at the screen in disbelief. I hadn't heard a single word from her all day, not a text. Not a call, nothing. And now? Now she wanted me to show up and pretend like nothing happened? A wave of cold realization hit me. Megan had never been on my side. Not really. She had always been the peacekeeper. The one smoothing things over. Telling me I was overreacting when I pointed out the blatant favoritism. But this was unforgivable. I put my phone face down on the table and took a deep breath. Uncle Ben watched me carefully. Let me guess, he said, cutting into his steak. They're at a party. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He shook his head. Asterisk. Eat your steak. I exhaled sharply, then dug in. Halfway through dinner, Uncle Ben pulled out an envelope and slid it across the table. Consider it a graduation gift, he said. Inside was a check for $50. I nearly choked on my drink. What, Uncle Ben? I can't. You can and you will. He interrupted firmly. Look, I never had kids of my own. Let me do this for you. Take the money. Take the opportunity. And get the hell away from people who don't appreciate you. I swallowed hard, suddenly struggling to breathe. I had spent my entire life waiting for my parents to care. For Megan to take my side. For someone to finally put me first. But the only person who had ever truly shown up for me was sitting right across the table. For the first time that day, I smiled. Thank you, I whispered. By the time we finished dinner, I had made my decision. I was done. I took a photo of me and Uncle Ben at the restaurant and posted it on Instagram with the caption, "Huge thanks to the only person who showed up for my graduation. At least now I know who actually cares." Then, I turned off my phone. I didn't want to hear their excuses. I didn't care anymore. I was leaving. The decision to leave wasn't just about escaping my family. It was about reclaiming my life. I sat in my apartment that night, staring at the check Uncle Ben had given me. $50, more money than I had ever seen in my life. The weight of it settled in my chest. I could stay. I could keep trying. I could sit around, hoping my parents would suddenly see me. Hoping Megan would stop choosing Caleb. Hoping, always hoping. Or I could walk away. And this time, I wouldn't look back. Uncle Ben had already put things into motion. He had connections in the tech world. And he had lined up an interview with a company in Seattle that was looking for young, ambitious developers. The position was mine if I wanted it. All I had to do was say yes. I grabbed my phone, heart pounding, and called him. "I'm in," I said. Uncle Ben didn't even hesitate. "Good. Pack your bags, kid. It's time to start over." For the next few days, I didn't tell anyone. Not my parents. Not Caleb. Not even Megan. I started packing quietly, selling off my furniture, donating the things I didn't need. I kept my phone off most of the time. Something about it made my skin crawl, like if I turned it on, I'd be sucked back in, forced to hear their excuses, their guilt-tripping, their lies. I knew how this would go. My parents would pretend like missing my graduation was one little mistake. Megan would try to play peacemaker. Caleb wouldn't care at all. I wasn't giving them the chance. I was leaving, and I wasn't coming back. The day before my flight, I finally turned my phone back on. I regretted it instantly. 47 missed calls, 93 unread texts. The voicemail notifications piled up. My mom, my dad, Megan, even Caleb. For once, I shouldn't have listened to them. But I did. The first voicemail was my mother's. "Ryan, this behavior is unacceptable. We've always supported you. And this is how you repay us? By disappearing? You're breaking your father's heart." I scoffed. Always supported me? Where was that support when I needed a father to teach me how to drive? Where was that support when I stood alone at my own graduation? The next voicemail made my stomach twist. "Megan, Ryan, I know I messed up. Your parents said it would just be an hour. But then everyone started drinking. And I couldn't leave. But come on, you're really ghosting me over this? You're acting insane. Call me." I clenched my jaw. She still didn't get it. She never would. Then, there was my dad. His tone was different, less angry, more calculating. "Son, let's be rational. Your mother and I have been thinking about our will. We had always planned to help you financially. But if you keep acting like this, you're throwing away your future. Let's talk." I laughed out loud. They weren't reaching out because they cared. They were reaching out because they were scared. Scared of losing control. Scared that, for the first time in my life, I didn't need them. I deleted every message, blocked every number. Then, at exactly 5 a.m., I got in my car and started driving. It took me 3 days to get to Seattle. 3 days of staying in cheap motels, eating at random diners, blasting music just to drown out the thoughts in my head. But for the first time in my life, I felt free. No expectations, no second guessing, just me and the open road. When I arrived, the company had already arranged a temporary apartment for me. I walked in, dropped my bags, and just stood there for a long time, staring at the clean, empty space. No memories, no ghosts from my childhood whispering in the walls, no framed photos of a family that had never really been mine. This was my fresh start. And I was going to make damn sure no one ever took it from me again. Seattle felt like another planet compared to where I had come from. In 6 months, I had built a life completely separate from my past, one where I wasn't just the forgotten son. The afterthought. The backup plan. I was a respected developer. Someone with a future that had nothing to do with my family. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for my parents to call. I wasn't waiting for Megan to apologize. I wasn't waiting for anything. And then, one random afternoon, the past came knocking. An email from my father. Subject: we need to talk. It's about your inheritance. I stared at the screen. A slow smirk forming on my lips. My inheritance? I almost laughed. What inheritance? My parents weren't wealthy. They had a decent house, an average income, and a little savings. Nothing life-changing. They had never paid for my education. Never helped me when I was struggling. But now that they knew I was successful, now that I had built a life without them, suddenly they wanted to talk about my future. I typed 2 words. Not interested. Then I hit send. Within minutes, my phone started blowing up. Calls, texts, emails pouring in. My mom: Ryan, don't do this. We're your family. We've always been there for you. My dad: son, you're being childish. This inheritance could set you up for life. Don't throw away your future over one mistake. One mistake? One mistake? Did they seriously think this was about one missed event? I could have written them an essay. I could have reminded them of every forgotten birthday, every ignored achievement, every time they told me, without words, that I wasn't worth their attention. But I didn't, because I had already moved on. I didn't need them to understand. I just needed them gone. I blocked their numbers, all of them. For weeks, I ignored them, but they didn't stop. They sent letters, emails, even tried reaching out to Uncle Ben. Finally, one afternoon, my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. I picked up, knowing exactly who it would be. Ryan. My dad's voice sounded relieved, as if I had been lost. As if I was the one who had disappeared. Not them. I leaned back in my chair, staring out the window at the Seattle skyline. What do you want? He sighed. Son, let's be rational. Your mother and I have been thinking about our estate. And I cut him off. I don't want your money. A pause. A long one. Don't be ridiculous. He scoffed. You're not thinking clearly. This inheritance could help you. I laughed. Dad. My voice was calm, almost amused. I make more money than you ever did. Silence. I could practically hear his world crumbling. What do you mean? He asked. I said, I have a 6-figure salary. I live in a high-rise downtown. I just got promoted. I don't need you. I don't need anything from you. Another pause. Then, his voice changed. So that's it? You're just cutting us out forever? I exhaled, shaking my head. No, Dad, you cut yourselves out. I'm just making it official. Then, without another word, I hung up. And this time, I didn't feel a damn thing. Seattle felt like another planet compared to where I had come from. In 6 months, I had built a life completely separate from my past, one where I wasn't just the forgotten son. The afterthought. The backup plan. I was a respected developer. Someone with a future that had nothing to do with my family. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for my parents to call. I wasn't waiting for Megan to apologize. I wasn't waiting for anything. And then, one random afternoon, the past came knocking. An email from my father. Subject: we need to talk. It's about your inheritance. I stared at the screen. A slow smirk forming on my lips. My inheritance? I almost laughed. What inheritance? My parents weren't wealthy. They had a decent house, an average income, and a little savings. Nothing life-changing. They had never paid for my education. Never helped me when I was struggling. But now that they knew I was successful, now that I had built a life without them, suddenly they wanted to talk about my future. I typed 2 words. Not interested. Then I hit send. Within minutes, my phone started blowing up. Calls, texts, emails pouring in. My mom: Ryan, don't do this. We're your family. We've always been there for you. My dad: son, you're being childish. This inheritance could set you up for life. Don't throw away your future over one mistake. One mistake? One mistake? Did they seriously think this was about one missed event? I could have written them an essay. I could have reminded them of every forgotten birthday, every ignored achievement, every time they told me, without words, that I wasn't worth their attention. But I didn't, because I had already moved on. I didn't need them to understand. I just needed them gone. I blocked their numbers. All of them. For weeks. I ignored them. But they didn't stop. They sent letters, emails, even tried reaching out to Uncle Ben. Finally, one afternoon, my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. I picked up, knowing exactly who it would be. Ryan. My dad's voice sounded relieved, as if I had been lost. As if I was the one who had disappeared. Not them. I leaned back in my chair, staring out the window at the Seattle skyline. What do you want? He sighed. Son, let's be rational. Your mother and I have been thinking about our estate. And I cut him off. I don't want your money. A pause. A long one. Don't be ridiculous. He scoffed. You're not thinking clearly. This inheritance could help you. I laughed. Dad. My voice was calm, almost amused. I make more money than you ever did. Silence. I could practically hear his world crumbling. What do you mean? He asked. I said, I have a 6-figure salary. I live in a high-rise downtown. I just got promoted. I don't need you. I don't need anything from you. Another pause. Then, his voice changed. So that's it? You're just cutting us out forever? I exhaled, shaking my head. No, Dad, you cut yourselves out. I'm just making it official. Then, without another word, I hung up. And this time, I didn't feel a damn thing. 2 years had passed. 2 years since I had walked away from the family that never truly saw me. 2 years since I had deleted their numbers, ignored their calls, and built a life where their absence was nothing but a relief. Seattle had become home. My career was thriving. I had a penthouse apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows, a 6-figure salary, and a future that belonged to me and me alone. For the first time in my life, I was free. Then, one day, my inbox lit up like a warning signal. An email from my dad. Subject: let's discuss your future. I clicked, already knowing what it would say. Ryan, your mother and I have been following your success. And we couldn't be prouder. We always knew you were destined for great things. That's why we want to reconnect, to mend things between us as a family. We regret how things happened in the past. But we hope we can put that behind us. We've also been thinking about your inheritance. And we'd like to set you up for long-term security. Let's talk soon. I read it twice. Then, I laughed. The timing was perfect. Too perfect. I had just been featured in a major business article about rising stars in software development. My name was out there. My LinkedIn was buzzing. My professional network was expanding. And now? Now they wanted me back. Not because they had changed. Not because they finally realized how they had treated me. But because they saw my success. I left the email unanswered. And then the flood started. First, my mom reached out. Sweetheart, please call us. We miss you so much. Your father has been talking about you every day. He regrets how things happened. Let's put the past behind us. Family is forever. Then, my sister. Hey Ryan, I know things have been rough between us. But Mom and Dad are really struggling right now. Dad's business is failing. They might lose the house. They need help. There it was. The real reason. They didn't miss me. They didn't care about me. They needed something. For years, I had been the afterthought. The forgotten child. The backup plan. But now? Now, I was the only option they had left. One Saturday morning, my phone rang. Mr. Walker. The doorman said, "There's a couple here claiming to be your parents. Should I send them up?" My heart slammed against my ribs. I hadn't seen them in 2 years. I exhaled slowly, steadying myself. Send them up. I wouldn't run. Not anymore. When I opened the door, I barely recognized them. My father had aged a decade. His once proud posture was hunched. His suit slightly wrinkled, like a man who had lost everything. My mother looked tired, her eyes red-rimmed, her frame thinner than I remembered. For the first time in my life, they weren't looking down at me. They looked desperate. Ryan, my mom whispered, stepping forward for a hug. I didn't move. How did you find my address? I asked, my voice flat. My father cleared his throat. Your uncle told us. He thought it was time we spoke. I made a mental note to have a conversation with Uncle Ben later. Can we come in? My mom asked, eyes darting past me into my apartment. I let them in, but I didn't offer them a seat. You've done well, my dad said, scanning the room. His voice tinged with something between pride and jealousy. What do you want? I asked. They exchanged glances. My mom sighed, her voice trembling. Ryan, your father's business, it's failing. We might lose the house. Jenna had to drop out of grad school. Stop. I held up a hand. I could feel the words boiling inside me, burning like fire. So let me get this straight, I said, stepping closer. For 20 years, I was invisible to you. You missed my childhood, my achievements, my graduation. You threw me aside over and over again. And now that I'm successful, you suddenly miss me. You suddenly want to reconnect. Their silence told me everything. No, my voice was like steel. You don't miss me. You miss what I can do for you. My mother's eyes welled with tears. Ryan, please, we have nowhere else to go. I looked between them, at the people who had once made me feel so small, so insignificant, and I felt nothing. That sounds like a you problem. I walked to the door and held it open. Go ask your golden child for help. Oh wait, she was your priority, right? She's the one you always put first? My father's face hardened. You're turning your back on your own family? He snapped. I let out a bitter laugh. You turned your back on me first. I met his glare, unflinching. Get out. They stood there for a long moment, as if waiting for me to change my mind. But I never would. Finally, my father let out a slow breath and turned away. My mother hesitated, tears streaming down her face. I hope you never regret this, she whispered. Then they were gone. That night, I poured myself a glass of whiskey, standing by the window of my penthouse, overlooking the city I had built a life in. I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel sadness. I felt free. For the first time in my life, I had power, and they had nothing.